A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 39. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
Welcome back.
We're back.
Yes, welcome back to the fray.
A dinosaur story. Sorry.
I know.
I had to do that again.
That's your thing, man.
It is my thing.
I am happy to be back. I won't get
Yeah,
into
we just took some time off.
I took some time off. Mostly it's my fault, but it's not really a fault issue. It's just anyway.
I was going to say it's not even a fault.
Not even a fault issue.
We just took some time off.
Real life got involved, and just on a quick note, I just some people had reached out and stuff and asked what we were up to and stuff, and I just want to thank them and believe it or not, that a little bit of it had kind of put the nugget in my mind that we needed to get back here and start talking about stuff, because a lot of stuff has happened in Star Wars. I realized that this Rogue One teaser came out kind of surreptitiously. I mean, there was 1 day of warning, and
yeah.
And
I'm not even. We can get into this, but I'm not even sure I'd call it teaser. Like it's basically a trailer.
Yeah, it feels like a trailer. I keep saying trailer, and then I go to look for it, and I put trailer in the thing because I've watched it a lot, and it's like I still have to research it because when you put trailer, you get some fan made thing,
right?
That has like almost as much views, and I feel like I've been ripped off when I see it.
Right.
But anyway, so there was this torrent of new Star Wars information, and I was out of town, and I didn't have the proper podcasting equipment, and I just felt almost, even though we weren't planning on doing a show, I felt caught unawares and like slightly jealous. I saw you were having conversations on Twitter with other people, and I'm like, yeah, obviously I need to get back here and start doing the show.
Jealous?
Yes, I was. I was like, hey, wait a second. This is the kind of stuff we talk about. Who's this guy? He doesn't even have anything about Star Wars in his Twitter profile. But
that's fine.
You did have some good interactions about Rebels.
Yes.
It seems like...
interactions on Twitter.
Well, I'll say that we'll get into Rebels a little bit later, but, I think there's a lot of people with similar views on Rebels right now. But... like I said, the first thing was the Rogue One stuff, but before we get into that, there has been some, I don't know, I guess not breaking news. Well, first should I do corrections first? I always like to do those at the thing. So,
yeah.
So for some reason I was thinking a lot about this, that I think when I was talking, when we were doing our review of The Force Awakens or I don't even know what week it was. I kept on saying that these, I don't even know there was the scene when, now I'm completely blanking. What was the name of the planet that got destroyed in The Force Awakens? Do we know?
I don't remember. Wherever the Republic was.
Planet Government.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was saying, oh, that's this actress named Freema Agyeman, who had been on like Doctor Who and a bunch. I think she was on Torchwood and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that's her, because I heard she was going to be in it. Then I find out later I'm completely wrong, and that even though she somewhere is supposedly in that scene somewhere, although I've watched it 3 times and cannot find her. It's like because they had one of those things where they list all the 50 cameos that you missed and all. It's actually Maisie Richardson Sellers is playing kind of like, I think she's I think she actually had a one of the deleted scenes that did not make it to the home video release had something to do with her conversing with Princess or General Leia earlier in the movie. So I think she had a bigger part. So I think that the Freema Ajiman thing was just a brief cameo kind of thing. It wasn't actually a role.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got them confused. And even though like I said, I still can't find Freema. So if you can find her,
Finding Freema,
put a red thing on the picture and send it to talkingbirdcast@gmail.com because you help an old guy out. And also, I think I erroneously said that Harriet Walter was Christopher Lee's daughter, and actually it was his niece, and she played Colonia, who was the kind of like the nurse that takes care of Chewbacca.
You must be very brave.
Yes. So it's for some reason I was just like, I think I said daughter, and it just irking me. So those there's probably 100 corrections I could make, but those are the ones that are bugging me.
Yeah.
As far as news, there has been an announcement: the Alamo Drafthouse series of theaters are going to be bringing the quote original trilogy back to the theaters this summer. Sadly, they are the 1997 special edition cuts with the added digital stuff. I mean, maybe not.
I guess sadly, depending on your personal preference, some people like the special editions. Those are the movies now. That's the canonical addition to preview a conversation we're having later.
Yeah,
you have to watch Jedi Rocks.
I mean, I guess it's like I said, I think it's gotten to the point now where a lot of people, considering how much of a wealth of Star Wars things out there, that generally people aren't terribly focused on getting those original theatrical cuts out. I would only say that in some ways it's strange because if they are doing the 97 versions, then it's not even the same version that's available on home video. There was that's true. An earlier, less refined Jabba the Hutt. There was some of the sound effects choices were different in some of the movies. Like Lucas had even gone back and, he was tweaking all the way up until the Blu-rays. Mm-hmm. So it's just this kind of, to me, it's another symbol of why, Disney needs to kind of, and I don't know I can't imagine in their paperwork, in their agreement that George is like, you can never release them as I made them because that's the caveat. Who knows? But it's one of those things where it's like, I would have been a lot more, even though I don't think they're coming to Seattle, and I know for sure that they'll be in Austin because I think that's where
that's where it originated.
They originated. So
although it's their roadshow series, so I don't know.
Is that the thing where they go out to like places that are like
Yeah, they're like some field somewhere. Or
where they've
on a boat or something.
They've shown Close Encounters in Devil's Tower and stuff like that.
Right.
So the news is pretty new, and it's not making it to Seattle, and it's kind of like, well, they did just show them in theaters back in December for that, showing all 6 before the release of The Force Awakens. So it's not really like this big revelation, except it might be a fun thing for people out there with kids. There is nothing like even in whatever cut you see, there's nothing like seeing it in a theater.
Yeah.
And also there was one other thing. There was one other casting thing kind of related to, kind of a news casting situation that I guess they're still casting Darth Vader for Rogue One.
Yeah, I thought that was a little odd.
And I even saw the word recast using. So it goes to show you that either the Vader will not be directly interacting with the protagonists of this movie, or they're going to do some kind of interesting CGI to reintegrate it. I'd heard that there was a Scottish MMA fighter named Seamus that had been actually cast as Vader for the Rey's flashback sequence that was unused. Because there was some rumor going around about that months ago, and and it didn't really seem to be picked up in the normal thing until they go, why would Vader be in the new Star Wars movie? But
yeah,
he never really spoke on it, and it just kind of dropped. And when it hasn't shown up either in deleted scenes or behind the scenes footage or anything like that. So either they just want it to die a death and not have it be something they want to talk about because it might interfere with their future revelations. I mean, we heard rumors of, Hayden Christensen working out in England, getting ready for something.
Right.
So we don't, I don't know if that was initially maybe they thought about putting him in Rogue One and then it didn't work. And now they're looking for somebody with more physically imposing.
It's all a smoke screen.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of after the trailers and whatnot. And I don't know how much of this was just J.J. Abrams his techniques and stuff. You almost question everything you see now. Like, we're being played with a little bit. Or it's a thing where sometimes these decisions are made way far into the process where it seems like they're being coy when really they're just trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And one of the the thing that they sorry. What was my point? Lost my point. Let's just talk about the Rogue One trailer.
All right.
I don't know. I was trying to be all deft.
Okay. So the Rogue One trailer. Here we go. Plinky piano.
Plinky.
I mean, the music in that trailer is clearly not the music that's going to end up in the film. Just as the music we got in when the Force Awakens trailers was not really what ended up in the film.
Right.
It wasn't even composed by John Williams in that case. And so, yeah, it's like kind of generic, not generic sounding because it is specific to Star Wars. Whereas, the little plinky piano in the Force Awakens trailer was kind of generic sounding, but it's fine, right? It's the, it's recognizable themes from Star Wars put in, counterpoint with each other, gets everyone. It did its job, I guess, is what I'll say. Yeah,
I mean, I'll take plinky piano over, all of a sudden, somebody going, when Felicity Jones goes, "I rebel," and all of a sudden,
right.
Somebody throwing in some Led Zeppelin riff or something that just kind of takes you out of the experience. Like, this ain't your dad's Star Wars.
Right.
So I do like that. Sorry, geez. That they're trying to evoke, at least thematically. I mean, I think they probably learned, like, even though some people were grousing about the kind of the bait and switch with the music in the Force Awakens trailers, I would say that generally I would call it a success. It evoked to this thing.
Lots of people were excited about it, which is, I think especially no one really knew what to expect with this. And so I think even more so, maybe not even more so, but just as there was with episode 7, there's this like, all right, I don't know what to expect. Like, what if this isn't what I want it to be? I think the mission, I was going to say mission accomplished, but I hate saying that. I hate it when people say that. It did its job, right? People were excited, and not just hardcore Star Wars fans. I think, people in general, or at least people who would be interested enough to watch this teaser trailer, who aren't like the hardcore, like I talk about Star Wars all the time online crowd. Right. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, this looks pretty good. I'm interested in this. And that's really all they just need to make sure that people stay interested in this idea, that not just that it's a Star Wars movie, but like, hey, this is just like a standalone Star Wars movie that ties into the story, but like is its own kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's like, and also they're like, hey, this looks really cool. So maybe if you aren't even like a big Star Wars fan, maybe you saw Force Awakens, maybe you didn't. This is like an action. This is at least a sci-fi, action brawler. People are going to fight.
Yeah.
It's going to be there's going to be a lot of running and stuff like. They do have I felt that Lucasfilm had a very different, quote, problem to solve with this trailer. Force Awakens, it was all that first tease was all about, just like kind of shaking up expectations in this kind of way where, wow, Stormtrooper without the helmet. Why is he the protagonist? Who's this guy in the lightsaber? Who's this guy in the lightsaber in the forest? Who's this voice? I mean, it was all like this is all new, but slightly familiar. And this thing is kind of, in some ways, they're like kind of playing up on the fact that it's all very, I don't even know how to say this. It's like, it kind of like, okay, yeah, it's going to be different, but we're using all the parts from the play box. It's not like we're not going to completely reinvent this. Like, okay, yeah, no, we've already established, that Star Wars that female protagonists work perfectly. It's not even awkward. It's just a thing. So it's like, that's not even going to be a shock to people. And it's just the idea, like they got the feel right, in my opinion. The introduction I find it a little interesting that they kind of, it's kind of centered around this character, this Jyn Erso character. Like we know a lot about our protagonist from a trailer teaser. That, for any Star Wars movie, I'm trying to think about, at least not the originals. It's like we're coming in kind of already knowing that this girl she's tough. She's been on the street since she was 15. She doesn't play by your rules or whatever. She's not even particularly, she doesn't even seem to be particularly liked by the good guys.
Right.
So, sorry.
Got a call coming in on the Talking Bird hotline.
Yeah, it's Talking Bird hotline. It's probably just somebody wanting to borrow something. No, so this idea that they have to kind of, and like, I wonder if the messages that they have in Lucasfilm and stuff like that is like, does anybody realize that everybody thinks there's going to be Bothan spies in this movie? It's that kind of thing where like they're probably having to actively, educate people. Like, they show the scene of Yavin 4, which at least to me totally screams. I mean, they're wearing the helmets from Episode 4. They're wearing those blue work shirts with vests and the big white hats. It's not something that I think they ever repeated in any subsequent episodes. No. So, I mean, they're really trying to place, at least for the viewer, place it in a very a specific time frame. Although whether that works or not remains to be seen. I mean, I think
so it's interesting then that they showed that there are going to be different Stormtrooper helmets at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Like they wanted to change that and they wanted to make that kind of new and cool and interesting, but then they gave the rebels the same goofy hats.
Exactly. Well, they're always been kind of the rough and tumble, like they don't have enough money for the good stuff kind of group, so they have to recycle.
That's true.
And also, like, even the guys that like, they haven't named the character, the guy who's kind of reading the Jin's bona fides or whatever you would call it.
Right. The charges against her.
Yes, her charges. He's wearing kind of a very Hoth type, like a General Riecken kind of that situation. Somebody had kind of suggested it's like, why is Mon Mothma on Yavin 4 and all this stuff, and somebody, I think it was Rebel Force Radio, said they probably fly her in for stuff like this and then they fly her right out. It's
I'll be curious to see how much she's actually in the film. Whether it's just sort of this one scene. I would be my guess. Maybe there's a second scene with her, but I don't think she has a huge role. But I think a lot of people definitely responded to seeing Mon Mothma in the trailer, like, oh, great, we're gonna get something.
Yeah, I was
get like some connection.
I was very like kind of taken back, thinking like, who is that? Is that Jessica Chastain or something like that? Like I just because I watched it on my iPad. I woke up and grabbed my nieces who I was visiting, and I said, after trying to explain to them what we were going to be watching, which I don't think they really, at the end, they were kind of like, oh, cool. But then they like 5 minutes later, they're like, I don't understand what that was. But I was like, well, it's before remember the first one we watched? And they're just like, to them, it's Star Wars is just this mishmash of comic books, coloring books, elongated toys, and stickers. But, they actually got the actress, and I should have wrote her name down, but
Genevieve Rice.
She had been cast and had filmed some very unsuccessful, narratively unsuccessful scenes for Return of Revenge of the Sith. And it's just this kind of like, if you go back and watch, I think they're on the DVD. I know they're on the DVD. I'm not sure they're on the Blu-ray. They're just really like Bai Ling, the model / actress, who's not a very good actress. I don't know why she was cast in the first place. And there was all this controversy because those scenes had been cut, and rightly so, because they were really boring. And it was just a bunch of people in like fancy outfits talking about maybe starting a rebellion.
Right.
And Bai Ling had said, the scenes were deleted because I appeared in Playboy or something. And it's like, well, I don't think that's what it was, because
I don't think
he could have CGI'd her out if that had been the issue.
I mean, hell, look at all this stuff Samuel L. Jackson's been in.
Yeah, exactly.
Like even before he was cast in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where it's like,
and granted, it's different for men and women in Hollywood, but that wasn't the reason those scenes were cut.
But so it was kind of nice to see that they really do kind of seem to keep their mind on the past, and the fact that they would actually go back and they could have easily have recast that with anybody. They could have stunt casted it and put in a Jessica Chastain or a Bryce Dallas Howard or somebody else with Jennifer Lawrence with a red wig or something. I mean, they have a certain age and time frame they're supposed to probably want to evoke. It has been 10 years since Revenge of the Sith, so this actress is probably 10 years older. Yeah. Well, of course she's 10 years older, unless she has a time machine. So, I mean, totally appropriate casting. I mean, obviously, she'll probably be at, like I said, talking head. The nice thing is that it really kind of... and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it almost feels like a doff of the cap to, us older nerds... who have played the video games, the Jedi Knight, the Dark Forces game, which one of the first things in the dark, like the old, I think it was like Windows 3.1 DOS. You have to go into DOS to load up this LucasArts blocky Dark Forces game. The first mission is you stealing the Death Star plans as a character. Kyle Katarn, who was a Force sensitive guy who was a stormtrooper who walked away from being a stormtrooper, becomes a Jedi. And then he also has like his sidekick who's Jan Ors, who a lot of people are like saying Jyn Erso, Jan Ors. It's kind of a doff.
Jyn Erso. I guess it's not quite a Australian accent.
Phil Nobile Jr. from Birth Movies Death had tweeted out something that he said something about how Star Wars was brave naming their character Jyn Arsehole or something like that. I mean, it is kind of an odd name. I mean, I know it's kind of hard to, you have to. There's kind of like you have to kind of get those names. You have to evoke some of the impulses that Lucas had if you want to kind of keep those names true. It's like Jin, even though it's not spelled the same, the Jin is also I think in like pre-Islamic, the Arab world, it was kind of it was kind of a thing like it was like a D, well, this is obviously English. It's like a D apostrophe G-I-N, Jin. They're like supposed to be like desert demons or something. Basically like the mythological version of what sand people were. This idea, don't go out too far in the desert because there's things out there that'll kill you. and that's the Jin arc of that. And I think they actually show up in the remakes of Clash of the Titans, believe it or not. But to me, it's like he probably got. I can see what the lines, like, Lucas. He probably got the idea for the Sand People from that. A little bit of that,
possibly,
and the Fremen mixed in, and then like the idea of like, the Jin, and then like, well, we have a character named Jin, so it becomes like this thing where it's like, at first you go, what's their name? But then as you think it all seems to make sense. Like Snap Wexley. I mean, at first you're like, Snap Wexley, but then Diego Luna, I guess his character is rumored to be Kaysen Willix, I think, as though he's not Biggs, as we were all kind of hoping. Yeah. But it doesn't. The more you kind of get a good look at him, it's like he's not Biggs. It's like, the way they did the shadow of his cheek and stuff in that cast photo. I can totally understand. I was on board with it until then I realized maybe the timeline would be too much of a stretch. And before we move on, I did have a point with the Mon Mothma thing, is that in those Dark Forces games, Mon Mothma would always appear as a hologram or something to kind of admonish Kyle Katarn for like, you're trying to do things your way, you need to follow, because that's kind of the character that Jin Urso or whatever is trying, I think is trying to evoke, not a copy of that character, but that, that puzzle piece in the grand puzzle of making a good Star Wars. So the idea that she would have this contentious relationship with even the authority of the good guys, to me is like, that just is so very much an EU staple. Yeah. And I'm starting to kind of form like this holistic feeling that really Star Wars now is kind of it is kind of all EU now. It's like you had your six movies by the guy who created it. He sold it, and now everything is kind of EU,
Yeah.
So it's nice that they're not abandoning some of these great concepts that
and I think they've always said, like, we're not completely throwing them away. Some of those ideas are still out there. It's just a matter of all it requires is someone plucking them out of the EU and bringing them into the new canon. And I guess I want to sort of talk about the new canon stuff or the canon stuff later.
Yeah.
When we talk about the comics. But, I mean, I think it's, I guess I have a theory about who Jin Urso is, or
you have a theory.
Well, I have a theory, but just to stick with the Mon Mothma stuff, I mean, I think the way they've been building this since they started the new canon stuff is, I mean, it definitely seems like they're emphasizing the idea that you have these small groups of people kind of working on their own that then eventually get unified in some way or connected, and so they kind of start coordinating with each other, and then that's sort of how the rebellion and then later the resistance kind of still operate, right? That's kind of the way that they started, and so that's the way they operated. And you have that with Rebels, Star Wars Rebels, certainly. The Aftermath book is sort of similar. I guess the Battlefront tie-in book, I can't remember the name of it.
Twilight Company.
Twilight Company, yeah. That was a little similar, although it wasn't exactly the same. But you have kind of this idea that you have like little pockets of rebellion and resistance springing up all over the place that then get connected under this sort of umbrella of the Rebel Alliance, and that's how they maintain it. And I like that a lot better, I think, than the way the EU told it, which was, Mon Mothma and Garm, Bill, Iblis, and Bail Organa got together and created the rebellion themselves, right? Like you had this general and a couple senators, and they just like put together all of their powerful resources, and that was rebellion, which which is fine. Like, and if that's, obviously Mon Mothma and Bail Organa are part of the story still. But I think the way in which that they helped create or even just helped foster the Rebel Alliance, I think is being told in a much more compelling way right now than it ever was kind of hinted at, or because they didn't ever really directly talk about its creation in the EU. I think it was just in the New Republic era of EU books, they would talk about it in the past, like, oh, well, this is how it was created or whatever. And so, if so some of the, again, these are rumors, I guess, that Donnie Yen's character and Zhang Wen, did I just say, did I get his name right?
John Wang.
Yeah. I thought maybe I got his name completely wrong. Donnie Yen and Zhang Wen and what's his name? The Forrest Whitaker. Right, that those three are bounty hunters in some capacity. That then either the Rebel Alliance hires outright, or that they just join up with the rebellion for their own reasons. And if then they're put together with this Jyn Erso, that's sort of a similar idea that it's a convention, right? It's this ragtag group of people who are thrown together in circumstances and
Kelly's heroes. It's Dirty Dozen,
right? And it's a way.
Guns of the Navarone.
And in addition to being sort of a more compelling way to tell that story, I think it's also smart narratively, because you sort of imbue it with some of the same feeling of, A New Hope, of, well, you have this princess and this smuggler and this farm boy and, this wise old man. You have these people who are kind of don't set out to become this small band of companions, but end up that way. So you get that same feeling without having to use those characters, or without, because in this case they couldn't really use those characters. And in the Aftermath books, it didn't really make sense to use those characters, but you can sort of still provide the same appeal and the same narrative drive, or the same narrative, again, convention, and still sort of keep people interested or get people interested in it that way. So my theory is,
okay,
I think there's a sleight of hand that they're doing, or maybe not sleight of hand, but misdirection. I guess it's the same thing, right? First of all, let me start off. So Forrest Whitaker, I'm not sure about how he'll be in this movie. He looks okay. His uniform or his armor or whatever is a little bulky.
People are saying Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah, and his voice, right? The way he delivered that line and that dialogue, it could be a little cliched, I guess. But he says, "What will you become?" And it shows Jyn Erso in some kind of Imperial uniform. My guess was a pilot, but some people have said, "Oh, it's a Death Star gunner." Some people, but she's got those tubes in the back. Right, she's got nightsticks or whatever they are, or melee weapon. I don't know. My guess is that that's how she starts, right? Because the other rumor is that her father was the guy who designed the Death Star, or at least part of the Death Star, and so if that's true, maybe his daughter is also working for the Empire, and then is just completely belligerent, or likes what the Empire is doing on some level, doesn't like it on other levels, and so is discontent. She rebels against authority generally, right? So she would work for the Empire, but she has a problem with authority, and then ends up. That's how the rebels eventually capture her as an Imperial person, but they realize okay, well, she's not really that big of a fan of the Empire either, so maybe we can put her to use. That's sort of my theory about who the kind of arc of her character. The only reason that I am skeptical of my own theory is that that's pretty similar to Finn from The Force Awakens, and so I don't know that they would kind of repeat that character arc so quickly, because then everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, this is just the same as The Force Awakens."
Yeah,
right?
especially if it's a situation where she gets out, and because like the first sequence, if you look really closely, she's wearing hand binders, as they call them in the Star. So she's
she's in custody.
She's in custody
arrested
for some reason.
Yeah.
And, probably I have a different theory, but, and I'm jumping around, but I had this thought the other night when I was watching The Force Awakens. How come they never question that this guy might, that Finn might be a spy?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this whole
I think they just trust Poe Dameron, right? Poe Dameron looked into his eyes.
Right.
And understood that, oh, you want to get away from here.
The 4.5 minutes the 4.5 minutes they spent together. But yeah, right. Star Wars works fast like that, but it's like this, I know narratively it would have slowed the movie down if there'd been a conversation where somebody's like, "Hey, the First Order knows where our secret base is now." Because there's a passing line about how to what's his name? Oh God, there's so many names now. I forget them all. Hux that they had tracked the ship back, and then it's like
pretty easily.
But the whole idea that like, oh well, maybe why wouldn't somebody have suggested? They just kind of take it on his word. Oh, you renounced the First Order. You're so great and everything. And it's like, wait, how did he escape from the most like evil guy? They never question it. Now I know it muddies up the narrative, and that's why. So it's like if they kind of do that again, they're going to have to answer, and they play it like they're super suspicious of this person who defects. It kind of makes the other thing not ring as true. But maybe I'm overthinking it.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, I have heard a lot of talk, and this does fall into spoiler territory, so you might want to jump ahead 15 seconds. That Mads Mikkelsen is playing her father,
right?
And that you did say
I alluded to
you
it.
alluded to it. Sorry, I guess and that's kind of that's the pivot point that they use to kind of press her into doing this. I mean, I'm expecting kind of, like I said, a Dirty Dozen kind of thing where maybe some bounty hunters, maybe some people that are in Alliance custody or whatever. Either like, oh, they're trying to steal from us, or we hired these people and we're going to get you together for a mission. And I'm getting a real kind of instructor mentor vibe off of Forrest Whitaker's character, and the fact that maybe either he will be someone that
the moral center or the voice of reason.
Or he'll be the person. He'll be the person that kind of, pivots Jin into being this, no person is an island kind of concept into, you got to fight for something. Whereas, you get the feeling from the trailer that things that she does. I mean, the actions they show later on, I assume, even though they're illustrating how she doesn't play nice, is actually post us learning about her crimes, quote unquote. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know because they're gotten so deft about changing, confusing people and all I see is like, oh, there's a lot of sand. This all must take place on the same planet.
Right.
I mean, maybe he has to instruct her in something. Maybe she's unrefined, or maybe he has to seek her. Maybe she has to seek him out to convince him to participate. And, and that's kind of like maybe there's some part of the movie is that collecting of your ragtag group, or maybe people she knows, maybe they take her and they say, Diego Luna or Kason Willix or whatever. And they say, all right, you get in this ship and you go find 5 people that you want that will do this mission with you, and here's some money, and go take care of it. And then you have to do this, by any means necessary, or what is this understood? I mean, the whole understood line in the trailer, that's another chop where there's obviously a missing line because the logic of it doesn't actually work. But I mean, it could be anything. It's, one of my big disappointments with, like the Inglourious Bastards movie, the Tarantino film, is I thought it was going to be kind of that kind of thing. Because
Right.
even in the trailer, Brad Pitt he's got that, he's chewing the scenery, and he's got all these faces, all these young guys. He's got, what's his name, the director, and he's got Paul Rust, and all these, like, we got
Sam Levine.
Sam Levine. It's like, all right, we got these little guys, we got this big guys,
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be a thing where it's like, let's all get them together and do this. And in the end, it's really a story about somebody completely, it's not even in the trailer. And,
Right.
and those guys are just kind of comedic relief in the end. And I kind of hope it's more of a kind of a Dirty Dozen, like a true thing where it's an ensemble where obviously, Jin is going to be the center of the main concern. But, like I said, Star Wars could really, as much as there is kind of an ensemble kind of feel to all those movies.
Yeah.
Although I would honestly say Force Awakens doesn't actually do it as well. But I mean, I love the idea of, like, James Cameron's Aliens kind of feel, maybe not in that extreme of violence, but that kind of idea where there's like 10 people of Marines in that movie. And it's like, even though you might not know their names, it's like, you know, each one of their lines and stuff. Each one of them has a signature thing. And it's like, yeah, okay. It's really Bill Paxton is kind of carrying, and Michael Biehn are kind of carrying a lot of the narrative weight, but everybody Janine Goldstein and well, I'm just doing their IMDb pages. You get the point. You get the point. I spend a lot of time talking about aliens. I could probably do an alien podcast too. But I mean, I don't know how much that costume that we've seen in Forrest Whitaker for it to be like, for Buzz Lightyear jokes or whatever. But
right.
I mean, I like him because, like, he's an interesting actor. He makes interesting choices. He kind of straddles the the highbrow acting to the kind of the lowbrow. I mean, he was in Battlefield Earth, for criminy sake. It doesn't get much more low budget sci-fi than that. And he also did a pretty fun turn in a movie that isn't really a great movie, but it was a fun watch called Repo Men that came out like 5 years ago with Jude Law about some future where people pay like high interest rates on replaceable organs and they have to go repo them. It's like he's able to kind of, bring what he has to stuff, bring a certain reality. I mean, he can be a very soft, kind of likable guy. Like, he did a run on that Michael Chiklis show, The Shield, and he plays a internal affairs cop for over like a season and a half. And for a show that's kind of almost comic book like, he actually was able to get some surprising, like, emotional depth in what was kind of he just needed to, I don't even know how to say this. He just needed to kind of do the lines. He didn't have to bring all this to it, but he brought a lot to it. So I'm actually kind of a little more excited than some people are about it, but I'm kind of biased. I've always liked Forrest Whitaker, so I remember all the way from when he was in Platoon. So I've always kind of, Ghost Dog and. Okay, so we had a technical thing where I was talking about Forrest Whitaker, and what did you have to say about Forrest Whitaker?
Well, I don't have as much to say about Forrest Whitaker himself, other than, well, two things. I'll talk about his costume, because we were saying it could potentially look
to
kind
infinity
of
and beyond.
Right. But I think it's the neck piece more than anything else, and the shoulder pads. I think aside from that one, all the costumes in the trailer look great. And it's the same. The costume department for Rogue One. It's the same supervisor and the same concept artist as The Force Awakens, so they have that continuity there. So everything looks really good, right? Not just the costumes, but the way the shots are laid out and everything. I guess the question is like, what's the script going to be like? In part because I think, yeah, I mean, and you know, Star Wars movies are not known for their kind of idiosyncratic dialogue or even, you know, amazing writing. I mean, you know, even Lawrence Kasdan, you know, who is probably the best writer of Star Wars films, right? He knows what he's doing. He's making kind of throwbacks, or, you know, he's updating these kind of pulpy, you know, movie serials. That's the word. You know, or, you know, he's harkening back to kind of an older style, updating it a little bit, but not like it's not super, you know, dense, heavy dialogue. So, you know, he's like, "What will you do? Will you fight?" Or, you know, whatever, that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, yeah. It's maybe a little cliched and not the best. But it just, in general, I think it looks like the trailer, from what I can tell, like this movie is going to look great. And it's just going to come down to the script and the writing and
right.
The dialogue. I think that's going to be a big part of it. And I'm not the only one to make this point. But it's, and I don't even know if the only Gareth Edwards movie, I watched part of Monsters and thought it was fine. And then I tried to watch his Godzilla and just couldn't.
So when did you jump ship on the Godzilla?
Well, pretty early.
Yeah.
Once I knew that it was just a movie about how white people get sad sometimes, which is pretty early. And then I kept skipping ahead. I was like, all right, well, maybe it gets better, and it didn't. But that, like, I could spend a long time ranting about Godzilla and anyway.
Yeah, I understand your criticism of that, and
so I think with Gareth Edwards, right, it'll look great. It's just a question of like, what does he have to work with? And that, like, we really don't know, because they went through a couple of screenwriters. You know, the story was just like, hey, what if we talk about how the Death Star plans got stolen? Like, it's not like they worked out all the story beats, right, and then presented it as an idea. It was just sort of like, hey, what about if this is an idea? And then they're like, yeah, okay. So then they gave it to someone to write the script, and then they gave it to someone else to write the script. And so who knows what the end product looks like at this point.
Yeah, I mean, to Gareth Edwards' defense about Godzilla, and I understand, because a lot of people were kind of unimpressed with that movie, and I'm not like, I wasn't like, oh god, I love it so much. They were kind of playing with a style that's, I mean, I'm not a huge Godzilla fan, but somebody had pointed out that Godzilla movies have a certain kind of narrative kind of situation and certain logic to them, and that a lot of it was kind of represented because, you know, they tried with that Matthew Broderick, Roland Emmerich one, went off the script with that, and people were really mad at, like, where's all these kind of ideas where, like, you know, where's the guy, was it Ken Watanabe is in it? He doesn't really have a part, except he just shows up and goes, oh, it's like what I thought it was going to be, or let them fight, that kind of stuff. That's a very kind of Toho idea of, you know, they provide, the characters almost provide the narrative to kind of, you know, even though they really underused, there should have been a lot more Godzilla in a Godzilla movie, but
right.
And my point is that it shows that Gareth Edwards actually knows how to emulate things. Now, whether or not that's, you know, gonna be what we want, because it's like, it's that problem. It's kind of like the Force Awakens thing, where people go, "Oh, is Force Awakens just a remake of A New Hope?" It's like, well, no, it's not. Because if they'd done that, you would have hated it. Yeah, because you can't remake Star Wars. You can't remake a movie, a 40-year-old movie, and not change it and just throw it out there and go, people are going to love it. And the same thing with this Rogue One. You can't just go, okay, we're going to put everybody in the old costumes. People are going to be, you know, sniveling and sneering like, you know, Mahdi was in the Death Star. And, you know, we're just going to throw in a wisecracking droid and people in a cantina scene, and people will love it. So, I mean, there's there's the emulation, which is it's like this idea of trying to give somebody something new and make them think that they're actually getting something old. It's kind of it's a weird balance that they've thrown themselves in, especially these anthology movies, because I mean, Abrams, he said, we have to go back to go forward. But I mean, those days are done for the numbered movies. They are not, I don't think they're going back at all. They're kind of, every indication is that people are saying like that Rian Johnson's like movie, it's going to be weird. Like literally that's the word they're using. It's going to be weird. Right. And I'm like, well, I'm excited about that because I don't want a rehash of, I didn't want it to be a rehash of Empire and then 9 to be a rehash of Jedi.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah. So I thought if anything, I thought The Force Awakens was more closely tied to the feel of Return of the Jedi. But then also, so maybe this is a good time to start talking about you got the Force Awakens on home video disc.
I do.
Because you mentioned something similar, I think, about, or at least in hearing you talk about Gareth Edwards as, he's good at being able to emulate a particular style. I mean, I think that sounds very similar to J.J. Abrams to me. And so given some of the comments you had about J.J. Abrams, not just after we saw the movie and before we saw the movie, but now having purchased The Force Awakens on home video disc and seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff and the documentary and things. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? So I have not acquired The Force Awakens on home video disc myself yet.
Yeah, and since you're not
so why don't you talk a little bit about what there is on offer there? What did you like? What were some of your takeaways from it?
Okay, so I did the thing I didn't want to do, and I went ahead and I bought it on iTunes.
Yeah,
and so I got it on the Friday, and then I was on a road trip, and I had some credit, and I was in a state that didn't have sales tax, so I ran over to Best Buy and picked it up on disc as well. And generally, I mean, it's a pretty good set. It has about an hour long behind the scenes documentary. I would say that as far as, being a fan of behind the scenes and kind of stuff, I would consider this all told, it was a little light. I actually kind of like an embarrassment of riches because having come off of this, I had just for some reason had realized I had bought these extended Hobbit cuts over the last few years, and I just kind of buy them and then I would
extended Hobbit cuts.
Yeah,
ask them at your local butcher.
A movie that generally wasn't very good. That was extended sometimes upwards of 45 minutes longer of a movie that you didn't like in the first place. And I will still say that they're not good movies.
Do you like it yet?
No.
What about now? Do you like it yet?
But what I will say is the behind the scenes for those were just exhaustive. It's almost like they knew they didn't have much of a movie series, so they really wanted to document that. Like, we really tried. We tried everything we could, but we had everything against us. Even though the first 3 movies were a success, the fact that because of a lawsuit that what's his name? Now I'm blanking on his name. I've got one of his movies right here in my hand. Guillermo del Toro. He had to walk away because of a time frame issue and a lawsuit that had nothing to do with him. So, Peter Jackson had to jump in, and then within a month before pre-production, he got a bleeding ulcer and had to be hospitalized. And then they had to start filming. So, each one of those Blu-rays has, this isn't even including the commentaries, 9 hours per movie.
Yeah.
They cover every aspect of the production. Now, some people would say for Star Wars that that's probably a bit much. But it was kind of it's not just like them showing videos and stuff. It just kind of shows you the nuts and the bolts of a production process of a movie. And it's fascinating. And really it was kind of the Force Awakens. They call it The Secrets of the Force Awakens, but Laurent Bouzereau, who is a well-respected documentarian for movies. he's probably, if you've watched a behind the scenes documentary on a DVD or something and really loved it, there's a good chance he's involved with it. So it's not a matter of he's screwed the pooch on this. It's just it's also new, and there's so little of it is actually people involved, are so little of it are people that have an active history with Lucasfilm to be able to kind of tell you a whole story. It's like, yeah, okay, we have the principal actors, but for all intents and purposes, they had kind of walked away from Star Wars, and so they didn't have a lot to say about it. So, I could only take so much of this kind of, I don't know. It just the behind the scenes, it just really felt like it didn't quite get there.
Mm-hmm.
It's this kind of, it starts out very light, and it never seems to get any kind of, I don't know what I want. Maybe I kind of wanted a little bit more of, anecdotes. So like, maybe there was a day where it was like, there are a few anecdotes. Like Carrie Fisher talks about her first scene on Dakar, that she had a lot of trouble, and she had to go back, and they had to kind of call it for the day and come back, and it took her. So there was a little bit of this and a lot of Harrison Ford kind of, and maybe because I know so much about this stuff, it doesn't feel as revelatory. We all know, like any Star Wars fan knows that has any interest in behind the scenes, that Harrison Ford had an indifferent feeling to Han going as far back as to the filming of Jedi. He explains it in a more kind of, you give the guy a little bit more credit, because the way that was portrayed in the past of him kind of just wanting to get at it, like, I don't want to have to do this kind of idea. Right. It was more of like it was how he thinks of stories. Mm-hmm. And he's very active in that. And, and a lot of it was kind of footage that had been shown in that little behind the scenes thing that came out at Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. Some of that was recontextualized. They show the behind the scenes for the filming of Han Solo's death and things like that. I mean, they do talk to the, a lot of it is kind of, I felt like we were getting talking head versions of anecdotes we've been hearing since last summer. Adam Driver, it's like saying like, people call Kylo Ren bad guys, but bad guys don't necessarily think of themselves as bad.
Right.
So, overall, I mean, it's interesting, and if you're a casual watcher, it's actually, to be honest, it's not as illuminating as say like the beginning for the episode 1, where you literally see them frustrated with what they have when they're done with the movie, and they all seem frustrated. It's just a lot of heads going, it's so great. I never thought I'd ever have a chance to do this again. It's, we take this very seriously. This is so important to so many people. You can't play around with it, that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of that. And then there's, 5 or 6 behind the scenes, special effects things. And then there's some deleted scenes, which honestly, for being a guy who generally likes deleted scenes, they could have just skipped it and not even put it in there, because they're I swear it's under 2 minutes total. Yeah. And and honestly, the biggest one isn't even included with the disc. It's only on the iTunes, and it's not a good scene at all. It basically it's what was going on in Maz Kanata's basement when the attack happened, and this very extended joke, kind of a riff almost on the Death Star jail escape thing, where Han Solo tries to bluff his way out of a thing with these First Order troopers. Oh, yeah. It doesn't make sense in we know. It's a more of a Star Wars thing, where it's like, the bumbling stormtrooper kind of attitude. Whereas, they've spent so much time in this movie trying to bring back the First Order troopers and make them scary again. Yeah. Kind of ruthless and bloodthirsty. So it so none of them improved anything. It was either they would overemphasize a point or introduce a character too early. It was just that kind of stuff. Yeah. So a lot of it, like I said, like a person like you and I, we've already a lot of this information. I honestly think that they're going to be doing a more definitive edition down the road, probably in 2020 or whatever. They'll probably
or at least once they release all 7, 8, and 9. I think.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of like, I mean, it's Star Wars. It's kind of, if you're a Star Wars fan and you like to have movies, it's kind of essential, but don't buy it for the extras or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's like, it just on a picture quality thing, I did kind of, one of the reasons I went out and bought the Blu-ray is I noticed, like, I bought it on iTunes and there was a couple of areas where it was like pretty pixelated and it was like, wow, the colors don't look right. Or maybe some of the motion, it's like, I'm still kind of physical media because you can't beat the picture quality. They've never quite figured out the way in Star Wars movies are kind of, those are the few ones where it's like, I don't mind buying it twice.
Right.
But, yeah, like I said, I was expecting a commentary would have been nice. J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan kind of sitting down. Even some conceptual artists. I would have loved to have heard some stories about kind of like the art thing where they're like, initially we were going to have Luke was going to be all throughout the whole thing and that kind of thing. But yeah, obviously that's for another day.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little disappointing to hear, but not that surprising that the behind the scenes documentary is that way. I mean, I guess, some of the best of that genre, acknowledges the film's flaws, even if it's like a great movie. They'll openly talk about like, filming the scene was really tough, or, I'm really not happy with the way that this character came together, this model or whatever. And that's interesting too, because it sort of takes you inside the creative process about how these people think about these things. But, they're not at the point yet where I think they're ready to start doing that about these movies, right? It's still all just like push it hard, push it hard, push it hard.
Right.
And honestly, so I was about to say something. I don't know how true this is, but I feel like acknowledging its flaws and sort of, okay, let's have an open and honest conversation about like the creative process that went into this thing. I feel like that's also not totally Disney style.
Oh yeah.
And so that's where, just in general, it's all like, push it hard, push it hard, push it hard, push it hard. Isn't it wonderful because it's Disney? And so, thinking about the sale to Disney now, like, I wonder if it's all just going to be like, yeah, we made a behind the scenes documentary for the sole purpose of like making you feel good that you like this movie, and like to validate not only that your feelings towards this film, but like the fact that you bought the DVD. Like, yeah, okay, this is a good movie worthy of me owning the DVD. Like, and so we're gonna make this behind the scenes documentary that, like, yeah, sort of gives the impression that we are taking you behind the scenes, but on only a very surface level. It's not every bad guys don't always think of themselves as bad guys. It's like, all right, well, that could be about anything.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say to their credit, and it just occurred to me when you said that there is a couple times that, like, they interviewed Mark Hamill, and his take was, my first reaction was, that's a terrible idea. This is a terrible idea, because we could just take something that people love and just ruin it. So, but they kind of dispel that pretty quickly, and they use it to reinforce their kind of. But yeah, Disney always has an issue with their legacy because, I mean, they've made as many mistakes and they have a tendency to kind of want to hide their past when things don't work out. It's one of those things where every one of their movies could have. I mean, like the Black Hole, which was their kind of answer to Star Wars. I mean, gosh, the stories that they probably could tell about that production, because I know it was a pretty troubled, over-budget production. But there's nothing out there. It's like they don't even have it on Blu-ray. They did a pretty good deal with the first Tron movie. If you can hunt down that on Blu-ray or DVD, there's some great documentaries about that. But those are actually recycled from the Laserdisc days. when people were much more honest about productions of movies. I mean, even to the point where I think it was Criterion who did initially did the Blu-rays for the James Bonds, and then was it Eon or whatever, the Broccoli family's company, they pulled the plug on the rights to those because some of the directors are pretty uncomplimentary about the films in the commentaries, and those in the commentaries of those have become almost kind of, well, I don't even know if people even pay attention to this stuff anymore, but they become semi-legendary in the home video thing of being why some people still held on to their Criterion Bond movies. Yeah. Because they kind of told it as it is. And I'm a person, I love to hear a good behind the scene story about a movie that kind of went awry. Hence why I've watched over the last month, I watched, all 27 hours of these Hobbit things, because the candor on those is kind of shocking. And maybe that's kind of spoiled me that, Peter Jackson says, we know we shut down production. We started filming and we realized we were filming for a week with no point, with no script. I would just be like, run over here. We're going to film you do this. And then we we have to shut down production. And that's the truth. It's the real reason why there's 3 movies instead of 2. It wasn't because they're like, oh, we're doing such a great job, we should expand The Hobbit to 3 movies. It's like, no, we're not going to be able to make a coherent second movie without being able to push some of this back to a third movie, because we physically have to finish. We physically have to cut stuff out of the story and figure out during our break how we're going to do this, because at this point we don't know. And now I don't expect them, when they have The Force Awakens comes out on April 1st or 5th, and then they immediately start this cycle of promoting this Rogue One. Yeah, I can totally understand why they're not going to be like, yeah, boy, we are so lucky that we got this, this movie done, because there's already been talk that they refilmed, the last third of Rogue One, that Christopher McQuarrie was brought in, and that they've been fixing it. And, sometimes that can save a movie, or it can be where you end up having really no negligible impact, like say the Brad Pitt movie World War Z, which had the whole last third of it refilmed, and it still turned out to be kind of really bland, and it's a movie people don't even talk about. So it's
and you know what? Maybe I'm looking for something that isn't there, right? Like maybe there are no nightmare stories of production gone awry to tell with this thing. Maybe it's just we wanted to make this new Star Wars movie and it went pretty well. And we were skeptical, but it turned out pretty good. The end. And maybe that's all there is. And that's so I should say that I don't just want the unvarnished truth, because I want to believe that or I prefer movies that were difficult to make or that are thorny or whatever, but I feel like you actually learn more about the creative process in those kinds of things, but maybe there's just not that much to it. Maybe it's not that difficult.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm looking for kind of a salacious crumb, so to speak, of, oh man, I mean, people always go, oh, I can't wait for the book of what's his name, Rinsler, the Rinsler books to come out about the prequels, because they want to know all the details. Yeah, like I said, the only controversy I've been hearing, I haven't heard a lot about there wasn't any last minute recastings for the one thing.
The one thing was that Harrison Ford got hurt.
Right.
And they had to rescript some stuff, and that's pretty much it.
And they actually considered that a boon, because they actually I think they were at could have had an issue if they hadn't had to take that time off. Because in some ways they said it was a godsend, because they were having some script issues that they wanted to fix. Right. I mean, yeah, like I said, the only other, what was it? The only other thing was somebody had pointed out on Twitter, and I forget who it was. It's how much did it cost to remove Princess Leia or General Leia's ponytail from every sequence in The Force Awakens, because every shot in the behind the scenes stuff, she has a very long gray braided ponytail kind of on her shoulder. And in the movie, she has, a bun.
None. Right.
And it's like they literally, and some of they're showing behind the scenes shots. They had to remove her. They made a decision to remove her ponytail at some point. And I don't really consider that really like behind the scenes, Ponygate 2015. But it does kind of show you that, they are working these movies out to the umpteenth, where if they're not entirely sure that somebody's hair looks right, they're going to go in and take a ponytail out. And it's like, okay, so that's the level of attention to detail. The Macquarie thing, I don't know how big that is. I mean, that means that there was Gary Whitta, then Chris Wheats. Was Chris Wheats involved in the writing of this?
I think this was the one.
Yeah, and then they obviously had to come back and fix his, either that or take out more of Gary Whitta's story. So the only other controversy I've heard is that there is some talk, although it has been, as of yesterday, he confirmed that he is still on the project, is Alexander Desplat. There was some talk that behind the scenes that there was some contractual issues, that he had not signed on 100%, and that that they were actually actively looking for. There had been a communication breakdown, and they were looking for a composer to maybe kind of jump in at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he says, "Oh no, I'm on it, but I haven't recorded. I'm recording in 2 weeks." And I don't know how that works. If you hit the studio and then, does he get dailies or rough cuts and sent to his computer and he starts composing, or do they walk into that scoring stage and then he starts composing there? I don't know.
By the time they hit the scoring stage, the score is written, because they have to know, right? They have to move really quickly. They don't take months and months to record the thing. They have, if you compress everything together, it's really just a couple weeks, and they have to get through a certain number of minutes recorded per session. But I think it's also interesting that we know what John Williams' writing process for these movies are. And we have no idea what other people's writing processes for these movies are. And, I guess Alexander Desplat's written enough music for other films that I guess that might be out there. People may know what his recording process for all of those films was like. But at the same time, people don't really talk about that for other films. It's mostly just like with John Williams that people seem to care about. Right. Okay, so how did you write the score for these movies? And so, that's another kind of interesting variable in there too, is how does Alexander Desplat approach not just the writing of it, but the recording of it and all of that. So, I think every composer, whether they're writing for films or orchestra or whatever else, they make changes in rehearsal based on what they hear, and this sound is a little too heavy here, so let's take some of the brass out of it, or this is just physically too hard to play, so let's change the notes a little bit, stuff like that. I think every composer does that, but that's another piece of how these things have been written with John Williams. That I know Alexander Desplat is a good composer, and he has done good work on other films, but this is Star Wars. I feel very protective of like the Star Wars music, and so the fact that there are all these new variables about how this thing is being made and how the music is being made, it's like, I don't know. What if some of those things were important, and now that they're not doing them anymore?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I kind of meant to make a note of this when I was going to do my review of the home video. So my biggest takeaway from having The Force Awakens in my home now, where I can watch it on demand, is how much I hate the new recording of the theme.
Oh, really?
There's something about it. It's tinny. The way it operates, it honestly sounds kind of like a mid-90s, like it's actually being played off a mid-90s kind of FM, which you'd have to be kind of a synth nerd to know that. So it stands for frequency modulation. It's a digital sound thing. FM synth, kind of fake sound to it. Almost like the brass is not the brass. It's a keyboard brass, although I know it's not. It's a mix or something that they did. Every time I watch it, it just like, it doesn't feel right. I really hope that they re-record it subsequently for every episode, because it really is kind of there's something wrong with it, at least to my ear. I cannot get past it. And at first, when I went and saw it, I was just kind of like so excited. It didn't even occur to me. Second time, it didn't occur to me. But when I went and saw it that fourth time, I was like, I was really expecting like, yeah, this doesn't sound right. And then, like I said, and maybe it's partly the highs are overemphasized on my television speakers. We all know that flat screen televisions are not the greatest for reproducing sound. So maybe it's being overemphasized. I did watch it on iTunes, therefore it's compressed again. And maybe compression sometimes makes the highs sound a little washy. So maybe it's it. But, those kind of things probably should have been taken into account when they mixed it for home video, if that was true. It's just, it feels like, I know he didn't conduct that, so it's his assistant's kind of way, but it's just one of those things where it does really stands out. It sounds bad.
Yeah. And I kind of thought the same when I got the soundtrack, that I didn't notice it as much in the theater, but when I got the soundtrack, I mean, it does sound a little compressed to me. I mean, part of it is that, the trumpet that hits that high note right in the beginning, that like, it sounds, in at least in the original trilogy, it was very upfront and very present. And in the episode 7 recording, it sounds a little bit further back.
Yeah.
Either physically from the microphone or just lower in the mix or something. I don't know exactly how that happened. But so I think in part that adds and makes it just kind of feel not muddier, but it gets a little bit lost.
Yeah.
So I think, so I wonder how much compression there is on that theme in particular, but then even throughout the soundtrack, I really don't love the way the strings sound. There's some quality to them, and I don't know enough about recording to sort of be able to articulate this in a very knowledgeable way, but I mean, there's something about it that just sounds. Again, maybe it's compressed, or maybe it's like it sounds almost fake. Like it sounds like almost synthesized for the strings, and I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure they are real strings, but like it just everything sounds too together to me. Like you can't ever really pick out the fact that these are kind of individual instruments playing, and I know in some ways you're not supposed to. But you still can on good recordings. Even, you have to, in some cases, you have to really be listening hard and really focused on it. But the strings in this soundtrack in episode 7 they sound a little synthetic to me. And the fact that I know that, I'm sure they aren't, but that they sound like it drives me crazy whenever I like really pay attention to it. I'm like, what is it? Like, is it my brain? Am I right? Am I not right? And if why am I hearing this? And so I think that probably carries over into the way the theme sounds.
Yeah. Maybe it's because he's not using the LSO. He's not recording in Abbey Road as he had done for every other movie. I mean, it's the timbre of the way that the music hits the walls, and the BBC has they have their way that company, Abbey Road or whatever, though I think those are some of the people worked for the EMI or BBC. I forget who owns it now, but they come from a tradition where it's like, it's not an experiment. The composer may experiment, but there is there is a way to record classical music that they've been using since the dawn of tape, and them moving it over to LA and this kind of idea. It's just, I think they thought, it won't matter, but I think it did. I think it really did matter. And if John Williams is going to continue for episode 8, then maybe it would behoove him to move him, fly him over on a private jet or something. I assume they did anyway. Put him on the Disney jet with everything he wants, and bring his family and if he has a doctor, bring his doctor so he can do this and make it sound right. Although everyone else is like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how J.J. Abrams works, but him being, I never contest that he's not a true fan, but part of me thinks to myself, there's not anything to him that made him go, John, this doesn't sound right.
Right. And that's why I wonder if it was, part of the compression or the mastering and mixing process that they just went like, this is the way things are done today, and so it's just going to sound like this. Yeah,
I mean, everything is so. I mean, I assume that this was recorded digitally.
Yeah.
Although I don't know, they did say. Yeah. I was shocked to realize that the prequels were not. They were full analog recordings.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that kind of thing where you're just, just every time, I almost to the point where it's my same problem every time I watch A New Hope and the Greedo scene things. I just kind of start looking at my phone till it's over.
Right.
And then because it irks me. Not that it just doesn't. To me, the whole thing is a piece of music. The action is a piece of music. The dialogue is a piece of music. The music is the music. Mm-hmm. And when something just stands out like a turd in a punch bowl, I would say the best, the way I could compare it to the best is that watching the new theme, it's like watching it on a Super Nintendo. It's like watching one of the games, and when it's like whatever, how many individual tracks the Super Nintendo could reproduce, and it's just the MIDI file being replayed through the sound synthesizer built into the machine. It was like, that's how I get that feeling every time. It's like, it feels cheap, but that has nothing to do with Alexander Desplat. So let's hope he's.
Yeah, and part of it too. So so Bjork put out a bunch of DVDs years ago of some of her live performances, and there's one that I can't remember where the performance is, but this was during her Vespertine tour, which had a women's choir and a string set, basically a small chamber orchestra, mostly strings, and then Matt Mose and Zena Parkin as a harpist. But there's as part of the sort of, again, behind the scenes documentary about putting this tour together, her conductor, so basically the way it worked was she had a conductor traveling as part of this, but then they just picked up, the chamber orchestra, a different one in every city that they went to. And so they just rehearsed them up for the concert and then just perform with them. It's cheaper than having to travel with all of these musicians. But he made this point that, and I don't know the extent to which this is sort of contemporary or conventional wisdom, whether this is accepted. I have a feeling he's not the only one who thinks this way, but the idea that, even no matter where you go in the world, like it can be musicians playing the same music and under the same director and the same composer, but it'll just sound a little different. So, the strings that you get from people in LA, the string sounds you get from musicians in LA will sound different from the strings that you get from people playing in Japan or in London or wherever else. That there's just some kind of quality to, I don't know if it's the way that their instruction is or some kind of cultural stuff that gets imbued into how they interpret a particular performance, practice, whatever else. So I think I don't want overstate that with regards to this and the string sound and the theme, the main title theme. I mean, because I think a lot of it also probably was the space in which they recorded it. But I do wonder, that's what, and going back and forth with like, all right, is it synthesized? Is it not synthesized? Like, is this just the way that strings in LA sound? Like the kind of people that they would get in LA, is that just the way that they sound when they play together as a string section? I don't know. It's probably some combination of all of these things, but you're right that it definitely sticks out to me whenever I listen to the soundtrack.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I don't think, because going back to how Disney probably doesn't want to talk about anything that might have potentially went wrong, even if they got to the mixing stage and realized, like, John, this doesn't sound right, they probably wouldn't, they might just use a synthesized, kind of like, let's mix in a synthesizer underneath this to fatten it up or something. Mm-hmm. And then they probably wouldn't be forthcoming about it. They probably wouldn't say like, oh, here's the guy that played the synclavier or whatever the 21st century version of it is, the orchestra samples to kind of beef up this thing. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of like, it just makes me think that there might be more to the whole story of the score than they've let for, or it's just a thing where it's like, maybe their ears just maybe the people involved didn't get the same feeling that we did. Like maybe they thought it was good enough.
Yeah.
So do we want to go to what do we want to do? Comics or Rebels or what?
Either. We can do either.
Which one do you feel more thing? Do you want to talk about that Atlantic article with the comics and maybe save Rebels?
Yeah, so they're kind of related. So there's an article that got published on the Atlantic website, I guess today, just this morning, called Enough with the Canon. There's no single right way to interpret the stories behind the Marvel or Star Wars fictional universes, and fans need to stop claiming otherwise. And I think it mostly focuses on Star Wars, or mostly addresses Star Wars, although it talks about, Star Trek and the new, Batman versus Superman movie and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Game of Thrones and a few other things. But it seems like it's mostly kind of aimed at Star Wars folks. And sort of the thesis is that, right, this idea of having one definitive canon to any sort of any cultural endeavor, any universe, fictional universe is harmful both to that universe and the creative process within that fictional universe itself, and then also to the community of fans around that fictional universe, whatever it may be. And so they're kind of two distinct areas. I mean, I didn't want to talk too much about the idea that it's harmful or toxic. It creates this toxic environment, mostly, where then, if women sort of raise questions about stuff, then men come in and try to question their knowledge about the canon as a way to sort of say like, well, you have no place here. Like, you can't tell us what is good or bad.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I read that part of the article.
Because I think that's, I mean, I think that's definitely true. But for the purposes of talking about Rebels and some of the recent comics, I think it's less relevant to that discussion, although it is certainly a relevant topic in general.
Right.
Is what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, I understand what the guy, I didn't actually who wrote it. It was a guy or a girl. Doesn't matter. But I should actually give the name of it, so if I'm going to talk about it.
Asher Elbine or Elbian.
Okay, so
is the author.
So the author kind of, and I understand where they're coming from on this, and that I find it frustrating, this idea that, this Disney's new idea that, like, okay, today the C-3PO Red Arm comic came out, which I have not. John has read. I have not. I just read a synopsis, and every indication is that it's actually a pretty good one-off. It's not a new series. It's a one and done kind of C-3PO story about. I won't get into spoilers, but the idea of droids in the Star Wars universe and their value as sentient beings and things like that. Actually the actual Red Arm aspect of it is from what I gathered, is kind of small. And it's just kind of a tag at the end of the story. And then the person reviewing it even points out that the fact that 3PO doesn't even have the red arm at the end of the movie actually kind of may have undercut the depth of the story anyway. But the point is that now it's like where people are like expected to cross medias and things to be able to get the full story of a movie. It's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
When they draw attention to it.
Yeah.
So like, one of the big things about everybody,
it's like a wink to the audience, like, hey, remember this thing that you read like 8 years ago?
Yeah.
We read it too. Don't worry.
It's kind of like if they really, the proper way, in my opinion, and of course I am not an employee of Lucasfilm, so nobody there cares what I think, but he should have just had the red arm, and then they never mentioned it. He just had a red arm because he had a silver leg and a New Hope, and he never brought it up. I was like, I wish I didn't have this silver leg. It's the thing where they could have easily have had him have a red arm, and then like people go, he never mentions it, goes on, and then like 6 months later they release a comic book. Well, maybe you'd like to know, and then here's a C-3PO one-off. And then in the end, you find out, like, oh, that's how he got it. And it just becomes kind of a passing thing. But when they emphasize it at this point, you're like in a movie theater, and people had said, like, what's the deal with his red arm? Why are they talking about this? Yeah. Well, Joe Blow, watching a movie, is not going to run out to his comic book place and buy this comic so he can spend another $5 to learn with his arm. But it feels disingenuous that they're telling this story, they're drawing attention to it, and then they're putting the answer behind kind of a paywall. It's like, tell the story that you want to tell. Now, if you want to recontextualize, we don't have to know we didn't have to know that the Walrus Man and Dr. Evazan or whatever. We don't need to know their backstories when they harass Luke in the cantina. We just know that they're dicks. Now, it's fun later on to write a backstory for that and kind of expand, but this whole concept that Disney has that, like, Rebels is connected to this and that, and like, oh, is Ezra really Snoke? And I mean, it's creating these problems that they didn't need to have. It's like, I think that they're probably, and trust me, down the road, they're going to probably change the way they do this because they're going to find out, it's like, this is frustrating. It's like it's like when my nieces who are very, very young, when they consume it, it's like, it's all one, mishmash of different things. It's like I said, it's comic books, it's their toys, it's their stickers. They don't understand canon, and they shouldn't because, but also I think that there should be the ability for a fan to keep a hierarchy about the story in their mind. I mean, I don't think that Disney should willy-nilly contradict themselves every couple weeks, but I also feel like you should never have to come out of the movie and feel that there was a big question that was drawn attention to the viewer that was not either going to be answered in a subsequent film or answered within that film. And I guess, and I'm using the red arm as a thing because it's a glaring example of what I would consider a misstep. And in some ways, like, people are like, oh, people have been so wholly emphasized on, like, why didn't Chewbacca hug Princess Leia after he got off the Millennium Falcon? And why did she hug Rey instead? Which I honestly feel it's like, to the point where Abrams is like literally said, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. And I'm like, I didn't really care. It's like, I kind of get that they did all their hugging. There's a lot of hugging in that Force Awakens. It was like at some point I'm like, is this a high school graduation or a Star Wars movie? It's like, so don't worry about it. It's like, you don't have to be like hugging each other every 5 seconds for them to have some kind of emotional transference. I assume a conversation took place off screen. It's like kind of tacit. I guess, and it's like, I kind of, the idea that we're trying to make people feel bad for wanting to take take Star Wars to an extreme. I think it's like, I understand what the author...
It's like, do it yourself. Like, do the work, because I agree with you, and I think we've talked about this before, but just the idea that I think they created more problems for themselves than they needed to when they said, all right, that stuff's no longer canon, and this stuff is canon, right? That because, not only did they're like, oh, it doesn't count anymore, but now there's just this uncertainty about what is and isn't canon. So, there's a Lego Star Wars series of shorts, or I don't even know what you would call it, about, the Force Awakens. So there's like on YouTube, there's a thing called Poe to the Rescue, and it's like a Lego Star Wars thing about, Poe Dameron rescuing Admiral Akbar, who had been kidnapped by the First Order, right? And so on Twitter, all these people kept asking Pablo Hidalgo from the Lucasfilm Story Group, like, is this canon? So is this canon? Like, what about this? This seems like it's incompatible with the story that's been told so far. So which is the real one? And he has to say, like, look, it's a Lego Star Wars thing. It's Star Wars. It's meant to be fun. Just enjoy it for what it is. Don't necessarily feel like you have to connect everything. I don't think he said it that harshly, because he seems like a nice man.
He seems nice, but he also seems a little fatigued with this lately.
I think, right, so I think even he, more so than Leland Shee at this point, is sort of like the public face of the Lucasfilm Story Group, because, he's the person at the end of Rebels, they'll do a Rebels recon, and like he's the person they ask about, like, oh, well, where did this character come from, or could this person do this, or whatever, right? He's the one who sort of answers the public's questions about canon, or just, hey, did this ever happen, or could this happen? And yeah, I think he's probably frustrated with like how people just go over this minutia of like, well, is this canon? What about I caught I found a inconsistency, right? So with this Poe to the Rescue thing, he was like, all right, don't worry about it. It's Lego Star Wars, just have fun with it, whatever. But then it connects to this C-3PO comic book, which they have sort of already declared, like, okay, the comic books are canon now. So it's like, so did Admiral Akbar really get kidnapped by the First Order at some point? I guess he did, because they mentioned it in this comic book. Like, so are we gonna see that at some point? Is that important? Is it not important? And so I think they just created more headaches for themselves than they need to. And I think, the ultimate point of this Atlantic piece, and that I know is something that you and I have talked about a little bit, is just make your own canon, right? Just, I don't think Lucasfilm, Disney need to worry so much about what's canon and what's not, right? In comic books, especially, there's all these reboots and alternate universes, and, well, what are the origins of this character? Is it this, or is it this? And, fans, I guess some fans obsess over canon, but there's also the ability to just say, like, all right, I like this, right? This is I'm trying to think of a character whose origins are wishy-washy, and I don't know enough about comic books to do it, but they're like, okay, I like, right, this X-Men story I like, this X-Men story doesn't connect with me as much. So, you don't have to, like, keep track of everything. It's not incumbent on you as fans to like everything. And I guess that's where this other piece of, like, it becomes then toxic for the fan culture around that thing comes in. But it's like, just create your own canon. Like, just decide what you like and what you don't like, and enjoy the stuff you like, and don't necessarily worry about, like, okay, does this comic book connect with this Lego Star Wars thing? And does that then connect with, like, a novel that's going to come out later that will inform the movie, right? They don't have to be connected. Let them be their own things, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that one of the fun things about kind of doing like the old canon, and I don't actually mean like the actual stories, I just mean the way that they dealt with it.
Yeah.
That they called the movie level canon, book level canon, comic canon, which they would sometimes tell the stories, they'd be contradicted. It wasn't a big issue. it's kind of fun to kind of debate that. I honestly think that almost like these people that want it all to be in one continuum and one answer thing. I think that's almost a new thing where
probably.
It's like the debate, the kind of like they always call it like the nerd debate, where people would argue about Star Trek and things like that. They all knew that there was no actual answer, but part of the fun of getting into the minutia of it was that you could have these debates. That's why I'm not so...
Right. The debate was the fun of it, not like the fact that there was a right answer to it.
Right.
And that you were going to prove that you were superior to someone else by knowing the correct answer.
Right. It was how deftly could you make your arguments. And, you know, we talk about this, a lot of stuff about toxic culture, and we could go off on a whole nother conversation. I will say only to like a super nerd kind of credit. And I don't fall into that kind of stuff. I disengage pretty quickly on that stuff.
Yeah.
But I've been around the block, and I've been around these nerds. You know, that is how they want to enjoy that kind of thing. And I honestly think it's like, I think generally the people who are like the real kind of fans that get in the minutia, they aren't the kind of people that you would say were toxic, that they want to be gatekeepers. I think those are people that are actually kind of middling fans of things. And they get their backs up because they don't ever want to have it questioned whether or not they're fans. So they kind of preemptively go after people like, you know, along like, oh, you know, that's not how they would do it kind of thing. Whereas I think generally people that are really into the minutia, they would say, well, you know, that's not really in this book, they say this, in this book, and they say, and I want to debate it with you. It's, you know, it's kind of like, those kind of fans are the backbone of these kind of fandoms. Mm-hmm. And there is a kind of certain aspect, and I can't believe it's like it makes me think about that article years ago that Patton Oswalt wrote for Wired, where he kind of decried he didn't say that, you know, but people, how much easier it is to become fandom. And now that's not to say there should be membership dues and a something you sign, but in this kind of race to, you know, act like, you know, Disney's thing. It's like, we got this new Star Wars. We want to get as many people into as on. There are people out there. You can't just come in and go, I've got 3 figures and I'm, you know, I know just as much about Star Wars as somebody that spent their entire life. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really important. Yeah. But I wouldn't be shocked if somebody that has read every book and, you know, every poster and every video game and has spent time playing the role-playing game, if you come in and go, I saw the Force Awakens and I saw the Star Wars movies for the first time over my Christmas break, and now I want to, you know, my views on this stuff, like, I want to be able to talk with you. It's like, it's kind of like anything. You wouldn't come in with a bottle of $2 Chuck to a sommelier and want to talk about wine. Yeah. It's like, there's a certain kind of like years of consuming and stuff. Now, I'm not giving them free rein to be mean to people. I mean, that's sad. Right. But this idea that, yes, I mean, I think it matters. It's like, the time you wanted it, the effort and the amount of passion you have for things, like people that get into cosplay and costuming and the minutia of, like, you know, watching the, you know, guy like Adam Savage creating a 1-to-1 replica of like the alien costume, you know, the alien astronaut costume or something. I mean, there is those kind of people that have these brains that are into detail oriented and they want to organize things. It's like, that is, if we get too like, that has value. They are honestly the backbone of fandom, because if people didn't care at that extreme level, these kind of fandoms wouldn't have existed for 40 years or 50 years like Star Trek and things like that. So to kind of like this idea that, you know, you're being a bad fan if you hold any kind of gatekeep tendencies. To me, it's like, I'm not ready to jump behind that. mean, I'm not into like, sitting there ridiculing somebody at a comic convention because, oh, your Wookiee bandoleer's on the wrong arm, or you used Mentos tins and tinfoil instead of, ordering project boxes from some British armorer in the 70s. I mean, but the idea, it's like, these people don't make the canon, but those nerds, they kind of make it.
They determine who knows the canon and who doesn't, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm really getting my point across, because it's like, it makes it sound like I'm thinking that these people have some kind of power. I think people should be allowed to like things at whatever, it's like you can decide your own involvement, but also at the same time, you shouldn't really get bent out of shape if you find someone who's way more extreme than you, doesn't necessarily respect the amount of effort you put in. No, I'm not saying that they should. That means you should be harassed or run out of the thing. But people have different levels of interest in stuff, and it's some of those conclusions at the end were a little anyway. Yeah.
Well, so that takes us to, I guess, the comics now.
Yeah.
And particularly, so the Darth Vader 19 also came out today, but I don't think either one of us has read it.
No.
So we'll talk about Star Wars number 17 and Poe Dameron number 1. But I mostly want to talk about Poe Dameron, but we can talk about Star Wars too. So Star Wars 17 is continuing. So this is post Vader Down crossover event. Dr. Aphra is now in custody at some secret rebel prison they have that's like super close to a sun or something. And so there's light pouring in everywhere. And where we leave off in this one is that, I guess someone is breaking into the prison for reasons yet unknown, and has shut down all of the power, and which then lets all of the prisoners escape, and sort of it's about to descend into chaos, or I guess it already has descended into chaos. People are being killed, prisoners are being killed, much to Leia's chagrin, and so Leia and Aphra have to sort of and Sana, I guess.
Yes.
And I can't remember her real last name.
Yeah.
The former never was really Sana Solo. So those three women have to team up to basically prevent chaos from descending on this prison. Meanwhile, Luke and Han had to do something, or they were given a bunch of money for some reason, and Han gambled it all away. And so now they're hauling different stuff. They're smuggling things to earn that money back, including Nerfs, and they get arrested, or they're about to get arrested for it or something. I can't remember. But I think, I don't know if that will eventually tie into the upcoming Cannonball Run storyline on Solo or not. But
is that
that's where.
I'm sorry. Is that supposed to be is the Cannonball Run thing? Is that a comic or a book? I forget.
I think it's a comic.
Okay. All right. I was confused where we left that last time. For some reason, it's like, well, did he already?
It's coming in June. It's a comic.
Okay.
Sort of like Han Solo and Cannonball Run in space.
But so did he already kind of lose the money in this?
Yeah, he's already lost the money, so now they're trying to get it back.
Okay, so now the story hasn't been told. So they jumped ahead, and then the story of how he loses the money is going to be told later? Is that how I'm understanding it?
I don't know.
Okay. He does it twice. He keeps losing money.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's been a while since I've read it, but
yeah, I know.
I think that's where we left it off.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's just
it's okay. So I will say that visually, I love the Sun Prison story. Like just the way that the team sort of drew it and colored it and everything, because you get this light streaming in, and it affects like the silhouettes of everything and the shadows of everything, and I think it just looks really cool. The story itself, I'm like, I don't really care, because I know, right? Ultimately, I know, like, this is not. This gets to the canon thing, right? canon wise, like this isn't going to be particularly consequential for the movies. So I don't feel any investment or like any dramatic tension about like, oh no, what's going to happen next? Like, it's going to be fine. It'll get resolved, whatever. Like maybe I'm slightly curious to see who this person is that broke in, but ultimately it's not going to matter that much. So in that sense, it's like, yeah, just let the movies be the movies, let the comics be the comics, and just kind of not never the twain shall meet, but like let's let the comics exist as comic books, which I think they're doing. But then the mistake comes in then trying to tie those into like, oh no, this is taking place between the movies, and so maybe something important will happen that will change the way you view The Empire Strikes Back or whatever. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. Just let them be comic books. That's kind of how I feel about, especially that one.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's another thing about canon that I kind of had forgotten. This is a movie thing. It's just that this kind of canon, this overemphasis on canon has, brings awry everything to the basically, Jyn Erso is Rey's mother. And it's like that kind of idea, or that Snoke is Ezra, or Boba Fett was another one. It's like, because everybody's looking for clues all the time. And it really should just be a story. It should be kind of fun. I mean, like I said, the original Marvel, nothing that ever happened. And I mean, Dave Filoni has said this about, Rebels. Nothing is going to break in Rebels that'll ever be paid off in the movies. Right. It's like the Rebels is to serve the movies. It's not the other way around. So stop looking for answers in that. And I think that's like, I think if we stopped looking for answers in the comic, and maybe it's the comics, if, that's not even their intent for people to be like, yeah, you really need to get the whole story. It's by reading these comics. Like we just think we have some good stories here. Let's just read them. Mm-hmm. But I think they're kind of paying too much lip service to this concept of new canon, I think is what.
Right. And that this idea that, I mean, and I don't even know that they were explicit in saying it this way, but just the idea that you have one story group that is going to make sure that everything's consistent across media. In practice, that just means that, like, let's make sure that this book isn't contradicting this comic, or, that the TV show isn't contradicting some movie that will come out. That's I think that's what it boils down to in practice. But when you tell people that you have this, group that's going to be coordinating stories across media, that in fans' mind, that's like, oh, that means things are connected, and I should be looking for like, oh, maybe this thing will play into that thing, and
right,
and so setting it up that way, I think it sets up expectations in people's mind that, like you said, they're trying to hunt for these connections where they aren't there, and like, maybe to jump back to Rogue One, like maybe Jyn Erso is Rey's mother. And, Daisy really had to say, like, well, no, just because we're both white and have brown hair, that doesn't mean we're related. But it's that question of who are Rey's parents, and became such an obsession for a lot of fans for some reason. I don't even know why. That, they think everything's connected. And I guess part of that's George Lucas's fault too, by like setting up the prequels so that like, hey, everything's connected because, R2 and C-3PO are still here. And,
right.
This guy is really a Skywalker. And hey, remember that thing that someone said to Luke, in Return of the Jedi? I'm going to have someone say it to Anakin in The Phantom Menace. And you're going to be like, ooh, it's connected. And so I think that's part of the issue too, is that fans have that expectation, in part because George Lucas set them up to have.
I don't know when he got that idea that was like that I should make.
That was a mistake. It was a mistake, I think.
I think he probably got halfway through writing The Phantom Menace and realized he didn't have a whole story, and then he started poking. Oh, maybe I should have Anakin.
This will be fun. People will appreciate this, right? This is what fans want.
Exactly. They want it all connected. I want Anakin to have made C-3PO and then have never become an issue at all.
Right.
Or, the idea that Obi-Wan spent all this time with those droids and never recognized them. Oh, well, there's a lot of droids in the universe. It's like, come on. We've seen a lot of droids, but C-3PO has got a,
Yeah.
he's got a way about him. Yeah, I mean, I like the art of the Star Wars thing. Except when it comes to faces, they're still it's still kind of like
It's a little off.
they do great robots and monsters and stuff, but everybody just kind of like Dr.
Robots and monsters.
Afra has kind of a weird way.
She changes every other issue. I feel like I know what she looks like, and then suddenly I don't.
Yeah, she kind of looked more like Jyn Erso, and now she's kind of more of a... Oh, I don't even know. It's kind of it's hard to keep it... I guess it must be harder to keep these kind of things consistent. I don't know much about...
Well, and they've gone through different artists and colorists and stuff like that over the course of the run as well. So that doesn't help either. In terms of keeping a consistent look, which, I mean, comic books that's never the point, is to keep a consistent look, but it doesn't, it's one thing when, okay, here's a slightly different take on the Iron Man costume, this one's slightly more angular or whatever, versus no, this is supposed to be a woman's face, and she's kind of supposed to look the same
right
from one issue to another. And then when you have the side problem of, and this is a character who was represented by an actress who is a real person, and we know what she's supposed to look like, or quote unquote supposed to look like, then it becomes confusing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look at the contrast of Leia in this versus, the way they drew her in this Poe Dameron thing. It's kind of... Do we want to talk to Poe Dameron?
Yeah, so let's jump over to Poe Dameron.
Okay.
So Poe Dameron, Leia's most trusted pilot. This is not quite an origin story for Poe Dameron, but it's an origin story for the squadron of pilots that we kind of see in The Force Awakens. It's his Black Squadron or whatever. It's him and Snap Wexley and a character who is in Shattered Empire, who flew with his mother post Endor, and I don't know, some other people, random. Not Elo Asti, but a character that's the same race as Elo Asti, who is the the mechanic who's trained to be a pilot, and then a woman whose name escapes me. But anyway, so Poe Dameron is sent on a mission to find the explorer Lor San Tekka, because he might have information about where Luke Skywalker is, right? So this is essentially the beginning of the story that concludes at the very beginning of The Force Awakens, which is kind of a neat idea. That's, or maybe not a neat idea, but it's sort of an obvious, hey, this character has been introduced in this mission. Let's tie into that. Let's give readers a sort of a toehold into this thing and build on that. I do wonder, we talked about, or that the thing about Admiral Akbar getting kidnapped by the First Order and Poe Dameron coming to rescue him. I do wonder if later on that will be one of the missions that he has to take on, except I don't know when in the timeline that happens. I don't know if
I thought I heard that was going to be part of this story. So
yeah. So it's Charles Soule is the writer of this, he wrote the Lando comic, and I think he's also writing Obi-Wan and Anakin. Is that right?
Ooh, maybe. I don't have my...
Did I... yes. He's writing Obi-Wan and Anakin as well. I don't think he wrote Chewbacca, though. But Phil Noto is doing the art, and he did the artwork on Chewbacca as well. And as well as some of the covers for some of the Journey to the Force Awakens sort of books for younger readers. And so I like his art a lot. I liked it a little better in Chewbacca than I do here, but I wonder if that is Soule's doing. So it seems very crowded to me.
Yes.
In terms of there's a ton of dialogue in this, and it's a lot of exposition. I'm looking at, this is page like 9, I think. There are 5 panels. The first panel is probably this third. It's probably middle range in terms of like how big it is in relation to the others. But it's right at the top of the page. It's Poe Dameron. It's sort of behind Poe Dameron's back. He's talking to Leia, and there are 5 word bubbles in this, including so many across the galaxy are attempting to curry favor with the First Order by selling them information. Thanks to your efforts on those missions you're so proud of, we were able to... Sorry, it's small type, so I'm not reading it very well. Many across the galaxy are attempting to curry favor with the First Order by selling them information. Thanks to your efforts on those missions you're so proud of, we were able to intercept some of that intelligence before it reached Supreme Leader Snoke. It tells us a great deal about his plans, but most importantly, it is clear that the First Order is searching for my brother, Luke Skywalker. Yes, we cannot allow them to find him. We cannot. That's one panel's worth of dialogue.
Yeah,
and that's a lot. Like, it's just a big, long expositional speech.
And it just and Poe Dameron just figured out that Princess Leia's brother was Luke Skywalker.
Well, no, I don't even think he just figured it out. I think it's just like, all right, so everyone is clear. He's looking for Luke Skywalker, and Luke is Leia's brother, right? It's just needless exposition. No one needed that exposition. Presumably, if you're reading the Star Wars Poe Dameron comic, you know that Leia is Luke's brother. So it's really wordy. It's really exposition heavy. And the pages, it just seem kind of crowded. So like early on, it starts, so that part that I just read off was like a flashback. So it starts with Poe Dameron in the throes of his mission. He's in his black and orange X-Wing. He's got, I don't even think he has BB-8. He's got...
he does. I think he
does. Oh, he does. Yeah, there we go. And so he's flying through some cave, some cavern, some rocky bit. He's flying through holes in the cave, whatever. And then the next page, he was like, wow, looks like we're through the worst of it, BB-8. Man, that was some maze. But like it doesn't look like a maze on the page. It just looks like a couple holes in the cave that he flies through. Like there's no sense that it was really that tricky, other than like, okay, maybe the opening was a little too narrow for his X-Wing.
Yeah.
So, and I don't, and again, I'm going to give the artist the benefit of the doubt a little bit, just because the way the rest of the comic is, like, it just looks like the writer, Charles Soule, gave him like a lot that he had to cram onto 2 pages. And so he kind of tried the best he could, because it's not the 2 pages where this is happening, right? He's flying, but then sometimes you're looking at him inside the cockpit. Sometimes you're looking at the environment. Sometimes, you're just looking at a shot of his X-Wing. It's not really, it's to try to give you that kind of cinematic sense of editing. But in doing so, like, you don't ever really get a sense of the space in which the X-Wing is flying. And so then later he's like, wow, that was really tough. You're like, it was? It just took you like 3 panels to fly through a hole in the rock, and then you were done. So I'm bragging on it a lot. I think I'm hopeful that it will calm down a little bit in terms of all of the exposition, and that, okay, now that we're all set on the story, like, we're just going to go for it. The only other thing I would say is that Poe Dameron says pal and buddy a lot, which I think is what happens when you're building a comic on an established character, but the character's not very well established. Like, they only have really a handful of scenes from The Force Awakens to work off of in terms of like how Poe Dameron talks.
Yeah.
And so, he calls like BB-8 buddy at one point or whatever. And so like Charles Soule just like extrapolated that, and he calls everyone buddy and pal. And it's just like a constant, like, hey pal, how's it going? like, sure thing, buddy. Like, well, pal, I'm glad we got out of that scrape, buddy.
Exactly.
Like, all right, it just becomes it becomes a little much.
Well, that's the problem that in subsequent, old EU stuff when they would have interactions between Lando and thing, it was always like, oh, buddy, don't worry about it, old buddy. It's like, it's like, come on. People don't talk like that all the time. It's like, I honestly, if somebody it's like trying to force a nickname on somebody. It's like, hey, Scooter.
Exactly.
Like, why are you calling me Scooter all the time? It's like, oh, never mind. It's interesting about this Poe Dameron thing because it kind of raises a thing that I was going to say from my review of the Force Awakens behind the scenes documentary. That one thing that I found was quite interesting is that I guess Oscar Isaac wasn't too hot on playing Poe Dameron because initially he was going to die in that crash.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, I died early on in my last 4 movies or something like that. And I don't really want to do that. I want to put all this effort in and only be in like one scene.
Right.
So, like, I guess Abrams went back and retooled the script. He liked him so much. He brought him in. But that being said, it does kind of it does point to the fact that he doesn't actually have a lot to do in the rest of the movie except call somebody buddy and fly his ship.
Right.
It remains to be seen if they're going to expand him in the rest of the episodes, but it's kind of like he's kind of one of those characters. He almost might be a Lando in the sense that writers have trouble figuring out how to use him and stuff because he kind of occupies a similar space as like Lando and Han kind of had a similar space. And so a lot of times they wouldn't work together in books and stuff like that. They would send them on separate things because they were both kind of scoundrels.
Yeah.
I'm not as huge a fan of this art as you are. I find that
I guess I'm just willing to give the artist the benefit of the doubt for now because I liked Chewbacca a lot and I like some of his other work.
There's a surprising, especially for these flight scenes, there's a surprisingly short depth of field. It's like everything seems, I mean, obviously this is 2-dimensional art, but there isn't a lot of depth in this thing. It's just like, you're kind of like, everything kind of just seems stuck on the page. Almost even some of like, there's, 2 or 3 sequences where people all like standing, way too close together for it to even be realistic. And it just, it seems flat. I mean, this, some of the stuff the story itself is kind of this thing with the egg and stuff like that. I mean, I'm kind of interested where it's going to go with it. But yeah, I mean, the over-explaining and the exposition early on, it's kind of, I feel like they probably could have condensed that into a few panels. Maybe even Leia didn't even need to be in it. It's saying he could just be talking to BB-8 and say, oh, Leia sent me out here to look for this Lor Santeca guy. And we're all going to know who Lor Santeca is because we've bothered to fight. I don't think there's anybody that's like, I'm just waiting to see how these comics pan out before I go watch these movies.
Yeah.
But like I had said in the notes, like I'm not entirely sure like, who the audience for these comics are because like you said, it's not really it doesn't feel like it's for like the hardcore. We got people that are trying to keep this canon idea. It might be this idea like, Disney does own Marvel and maybe they're like, well, we want to keep these stories light. We want people to be able to jump right in and be able to feel like they understand the story. So maybe they are kind of trying to go away. Like we need to repeat, maybe people don't know that she's, Luke Skywalker didn't have a big part in Force Awakens. So maybe people don't know that Leia is his sister or something like that. Like we need to keep re-emphasizing these familial connections, which, I guess you could make that argument. I guess not everybody, know the context because they are trying to introduce, it is for all intents purposes, we are at this point where it's Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's, some of the old characters are there, but the emphasis is supposed to be on the new ones.
Yeah. I guess in terms of the Lor Santeca stuff, I guess we did get some new information here in that he's an explorer, which they never describe who he is or explain who he is in The Force Awakens, and so it's like, okay, is he an old Jedi? Is he, someone from Alderaan? Is he, all he says is like, this should set things right,
he said something about I've traveled so far and all this stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's. Yeah, I'm willing to give it a shot. I didn't. My first reaction, I think, the Obi-Wan and Anakin, kind of like my first reaction was kind of like when I read the first issue was like, well, I'll read it, but I'm not really sure what I think about it. And here it's, I'll read it. I'm willing to give it a shot, but it's a lot of writing. And I take your points about the artwork. Too, that it's the artwork didn't really strike me as being fantastic, but I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, at least for now.
Yeah, the one thing I'll definitely give it the old college try. But there's supposed to be another Princess Leia book coming out. I forget the name of it.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, they're doing ads for it, and
Bloodlines.
Bloodlines.
Sorry, I thought you meant like comic book, like
no, sorry,
but no, Bloodlines. Yeah, written by
Claudia
the woman
Gray.
Claudia Gray. Yeah.
This to me sounds like this might be something that it's going to come out in May 3rd, so just in a few weeks. And so it kind of, I'm excited about this because it does kind of, it's what is it set like, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. I think it's post Kylo Ren leaving the family but her formation, the idea that, it's going to, I'm looking forward to some of this. I like to see some more of this post Return of the Jedi stuff, but in the context of how these old characters are dealing with it, rather than, because I almost feel like the better we get an idea of that, the more we'll be like more excited to hear about the new characters. It's kind of like, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm at with these comics. It's just, every time I'm reading, I'm like, okay, this is all right. Like, it's so hit or miss. I'll read one and I go, that was really good. And it feels like it's over way too soon. And then I get one and I'm just like, kind of like, how many pages is left on this? Because it's just not doing it for me.
Yeah. And so we'll see how the Darth Vader that just came out today, how that goes. Because that's been sort of the most consistent, probably, which seems weird to say considering there's an aspect to it that I absolutely hate, which is those like fake, they're not real Force users, but they're being trained to like supplant Darth Vader,
right?
Whatever. Like, I don't like that storyline at all. But
I'm training your replacement, Lord Vader. Yeah. Show them how to make coffee.
Yeah. But beyond that, I think the Darth Vader title has been the most consistent that they've had so far.
I would say that.
So that's kind of like, that's kind of carrying him right now.
It's kind of weird that it is. It's more compelling than even the branded Star Wars title. It's kind of like, oh wow. Yeah, I know. And speaking of like Force users doing weird things, I guess we'll obviously have to table this for next week. But some of the stuff with going on that went at the last episode of Rebels, with the helicoptering.
I mean,
maybe we should.
Yeah, we're running out of time. But just the helicopter.
I know. So that's what we're probably gonna dip back into. We'll probably talk about Darth Vader. Is this 18? We up to Darth Vader 18 now, or I don't even know.
19.
19. Get into Darth Vader. We'll definitely cover Rebels and whatever news. Can't review the new add-ons for the PlayStation. I mean, for the video game
Battlefront,
because I don't want to pay $50 for these add-ons. But I did hear today Lando is forthcoming in spring. He will be.
I saw that as well.
He will be playable.
I always like Lando.
I might have to do it. I might have to buy it. But I think that's good for this week. If you want to reach out and slap us or whatever, you can obviously you can get at talkingbirdcast on twitter.com and talkingbirdcast@gmail.com are probably the best ways to get a hold of us right now. You know, you can do it in however one. You can send us a voicemail or whatever. I'm not doing any contests anymore. You guys, my niece has got those comics.
You need to participate.
You kids, I offered you free comics, but I ended up giving them to my nieces. They didn't even have to enter the contest. They don't even listen to this show. Anyway, we do appreciate you listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially after us taking that break, if you've come back and you're sticking it out with us, I am humbled by that. And I think that's pretty much it for Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
And I am still John Llewellyn.
Good night, and may the Force be with you.